I wanted to talk tonight about something I've talked about before, but it came up again for me as something that's worth talking about, and it's the paradox of freedom. And I noticed tonight in the chanting we talk about following the Buddha way. Is that what I say? What is it? Toward the end of the service, we say following the Buddha way. I can't remember. Anyway, what is the Buddha way? What is the Buddha way? Now there's an interesting question. What is the Buddha way? Do you give in? Okay, well maybe we'll find an answer, I don't know, but I've called this talk the paradox of freedom, and it's to do with, I've forgotten the title of this retreat we did at Crosby. What was it called? Stepping out of self-deception. Stepping out of self-deception. Okay, which is a book, which is a fantastic book. I've forgotten the name of the author. Anyway, so the paradox of freedom. So the question I really want to ask you and ask myself is, how do we live with the paradox of this sense that I'm sure we all have of being fully me? You know, I'm fully Dave Scott, you're fully Pav, you're fully Linda, and not only are we fully ourselves, but I think most of us are attached to the idea of being, or at least of feeling the fullness of being who you are. So I mean, I'm assuming that everybody really feels identified with who they are. We may have some realised beings here, but most of the time I think, is that right? We're mainly identified with who we are, yeah. And then, but how do you tie that up with the realisation that we talk about, that the Buddha had, of emptiness and shunyata, an emptiness of a personal self? How do you square that? How do you live with the urge, on the one hand, to find meaning and purpose, which comes out of this sense of self, and on the other, with meaninglessness, with timelessness, with distancelessness, with unborn, undyingness? How do you live with all these things, these essentials of our basic nature, when they're in complete contradiction to how we normally experience the world? I'm assuming that if you're in this practice and you've been in it long enough, you do accept, to some degree anyway, from your own experience, that each of those things represents a half of our reality. But most of us choose to be deluded or entertained, these are the words I've chosen, or captured, or even indulged, or governed by the language and ideas of a separate self. Is that right? Most of us do. A valid separate self that's isolated from other selves. So my sense and my understanding of my own expression of spiritual practice is, how do we bring a balance to bear between these two paradoxes? Between the personal me and the selfishness that brings, and the undying, unborn, selfless self. How do we bring those two together? How do we accept that life is meaningless? That life is meaningless, and also life has a very valid point. It's both. How do we manage that? Where is a meeting place between those two realities? How do we transcend both those perceptions? And how do we deal with the fact that in reality, there is only one reality, and both those perceptions that we talk about regularly, in fact, don't exist. There's no such thing as a separate independent self, and there's no such thing as a no self. The two things exist intrinsically together. You know, we in shorthand we say form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Strange business, eh? So this is what the Buddha said when he was talking about how we perceive the world. He neither confirms nor negates. He neither confirms the small self nor negates it. Neither does he confirm emptiness nor does he negate it. He says it is a state without ordinary perception and without disordered perception. And it's a state without a lack of perception, and it's a state without any annihilation of perception. So, I'm sorry, that's a bit complicated. It's got a lot of double negatives in it. I had to really unpick it. But basically he's saying that it's not this or it's not that. It's not emptiness and it's not form. It's both. So, we talk about two realities. One is we assume everything has an inherent intrinsic reality, and we also talk about everything as being empty and illusory. So if we stick with the first point, if we stick to everything as an independent, separate reality, there can't be any harmony. Because that's, you know, it's like trying to push a chair up against the wall or a table against the door. You know, you can't have harmony. Equally, if we assume everything is empty and illusory, finally there's no point in doing anything, because everything's fine. If everything's empty and illusory and just this, why would you even have a spiritual practice? So one denies harmony and the other denies any idea of progress or meaning. And if we stand in either perspective, just as like if a Jehovah's Witness knocks at the door and you stand in the circle of the Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs, it all makes sense. You know, it's very difficult to, you know, it's very convincing. And if you lived a life with somebody that lived in emptiness, it would feel, you know, perfectly valid. Equally, if you live a life, the life that we live, which is a life which is more attached to separateness and the sense of small self, that also seems completely valid. And for most people, it's the only valid way of seeing the world, which is, you know, which I would suggest is why we have so much trouble. So, what do we do? Well, this apparent duality that we create, and it is a duality because the two ways of seeing the world are not separate. But we do create it, and we experience the small self as being restricted and limited and trapped and not free, and then we have this idea of this kind of state of nirvana in which there is freedom and spaciousness and openness, and we won't be trapped. So we set up that duality, and as soon as we set up that duality, we obviously create the idea of on this side we're trapped and on this side we're free. So we've created another duality. What about if, in fact, we're neither free nor trapped? We're neither. We've created the idea of freedom and bondage by creating this idea that there's something that we need to move toward, to aspire to. What about if we just did away with that? And we focus instead on awareness. Now, you know, I've often talked about, it's said many times that there are three things you need for this practice: awareness, awareness, and awareness. But why is awareness so important? Because awareness is just what it is. It's just this. Awareness is just being present to this. Awareness doesn't carry with it any intrinsic problems. We're not, if we're aware or conscious of what's happening and of our lives, just aware, then there's no sense of freedom or bondage. There's no sense of wrong or right. There's no sense that we need to find something or to be different. We're just experiencing life as is. Now, I'm not saying that's easy, but that's the paradox of freedom, that we created our own prison by this idea that we're trapped. So there's actually no need to go out looking for liberation. I'm doing myself out of a job. Because if we remove the idea that we're trapped, then we're free, and we don't need to have this idea of liberation. So if we do that, then you might say to me, well, what about emotions, negative emotions, all the things that we feel, and all the upsets, and all the, the confusion and emotions that arise in our lives? What about that? Do you think you're trapped in there? Do you think that's a trap? I don't think so. I think that is also freedom. I mean, you're free to feel those things.
Okay, it's only a trap, I think, if you choose to be trapped.
You choose to categorise it as a trap, yeah.
Well, actually, I want to be miserable,
Yeah.
I will not be listening to that.
So, the final conclusion of stepping out of self. Self-deception, brain's gone, is that we stop the struggle and we live in the paradox of that we're both free and not free simultaneously. So I've forgotten what happens, but I think when things get trapped in a net and they struggle, they get even more trapped, they get wrapped up in the net. So we don't struggle. And there's not even a net. We could say the netless net, the same as the gateless gate. So it's very hard to encapsulate all this. So our practice, and I really encourage you to continue with practice. This, as I said before, I was teasing about doing myself out of a job, because actually for me this makes practice much more interesting, because practice now comes not from a place of neediness or of, and not that there's anything wrong with that either. Everything's okay. That's okay as well, but the practice becomes more fresh if we just see it as a celebration of this life. So it doesn't come from a place of, of need. It comes from a place that actually we're already free. It's an amazing thing to be alive, and we're going to appreciate it. And one way we appreciate it is in practice. We sit together, we keep the altar nice, we bring flowers, sometimes you bring biscuits, you volunteer to clean the cups, you do all that kind of mundane stuff, and you think, how lucky I am to have the chance to do that. That's the plan. It's hard, yeah, but that's the plan. I think that's the basic kind of attraction of this whole tradition, is that it takes the mundane the everyday that's available to us all on a regular basis, all the time in fact, and it says that it's precious, which is great, isn't it? I mean, you don't have to be rich or talented, although both of those things are quite nice. But yeah, well, that's it really.